I want to welcome everyone here to a new series on the Nebula online conference called Narrative Worlds. And I want to thank you all for being here. I'm your host, Kate Elliott. That's all the introduction for me you're going to get. The goal of this series is to, I'm reading from this, and this is the first one, so this is going to be interesting. I welcome you all to our initial and to our opening show. The goal of this series is to dig into the idea of narrative worlds and the theory and practice of building them. So each month, a guest will join me for a dialogue on a specific aspect of world building. We'll talk for about 40 minutes and then leave some space for questions at the end of the hour. And I'll close the hour by mentioning forthcoming guests and topics. And before we start, there's an Ask the Question button at the bottom of the screen. Please use that. And please use specific to the topic or specific to the topic of world building questions only. I won't be looking at chat. My final standard disclaimer, this series is not about a goal. It's not a lesson. It's a discussion between professionals about their experience. There's no right answer. There's no secret handshake. If you hear something that's useful to you, that's fantastic. If not, and that's also par for the course. So let me introduce today's fabulous guest, who is all the way from the UK. Tade Thompson is the multiple award-nominated and award-winning author of the science fiction Rosewater Trilogy, which is fantastic. The Murders of Molly Southbourne horror novellas, which are too scary for me, but are fantastic, I have definitely heard. And the contemporary thriller, which I love, Making Wolf. Is there anything more you'd like me to add?
No, that's fine. I mean, I've written some screenplays, but that's, let's just say that's not relevant for now. Hi, Kate.
For now. Hello. Hello. It is nighttime over there because of the miracle of time zones.
Yes.
Or the round earth. I don't know.
It's a beautiful thing.
It is a beautiful thing. So you agreed to do this with me, to talk about world building. And our topic today is how much is too much and how little is too little.
Okay, we're not going to talk about serial maximalists, are we?
Well, I think you should explain that to people.
Okay.
I think you should world build this for people.
Okay, so I think people should realize is that I've known Kate for a long time, and we've corresponded for a long time, and we have certain specific differences in the way we come to writing and world building in particular. Kate, and to an extent our other friend Elliott, they have a style that is basically all-inclusive. And while my own particular preference is more exclusive. So in other words, people who put in the kitchen sink versus people who think, does a kitchen sink even exist? Is it necessary? So I think that we have two different styles. So I basically tease Kate for being a serial maximalist because she is unable to write very short fiction. She's congenitally unable to do that.
I try. But it hasn't happened. But what I want to ask you, even to start with, is what do you think world building is? What is it to you?
All right, I'm gonna start by telling a story. All right, or just a nursery rhyme. Okay, so Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. All right, so that's a nursery rhyme that a lot of people in the West will have heard of. All right, and the world building in that nursery rhyme is a hill and a pail. All right, and there is the invisible world building, which is that on the top of the hill there is either a well or a standpipe, something that dispenses water. All right, now all that is necessary to understand that rhyme and to understand the situation is to know what a hill is, to know what water is, and to know what a pail is. All right, that's all you really need to understand as the basis of it. But the rhyme is really about a person who walks up a hill and falls down. The action of that entire narrative is that a person cracks his head falling down a hill. By the way, sidebar, Jill actually used to be a male character in the original version of it.
Really?
It used to be Jill with a G, not Jill with a J. The female Jill came later. But anyway, my point is this. You can't talk about world building without talking about what a story is or what a story is meant to do. And a story is actually, regardless of how trifling the story might be, a story is presenting a point of view to the world, to whoever is reading it. There's a point of view you are putting to the world. And in order to get that point of view, you need the mind of the writer and the mind of the reader to connect. And for their minds to connect, you need a space to put the thought in. And world building is the space in which you put the thought you're trying to transfer into. All right. The world building, the necessary world building is what is the crucible within which your thought is going to be prepared. All right. So you need to know that, these are the basics that you need to know before I can tell you the thing I want to tell you. All right. So I need you to know that there is a hill and there is a place where water is fetched. All right. Whether it be a pipe or a well, probably most likely to be a well. All right. And that these two people are going up the hill. There's certain assumptions that we make immediately, but we don't bother about that. The key thing here is this. There is the explicit world building, all right, and the implicit world building. In other words, the things that you specifically say, like, yes, there is a hill, and the things you don't say, like there is something on the hill where they will get water from. Because that's implicit. Okay, there's a well, or there's a waterfall, or there is a source of water on the top of that hill. So you will imagine that, and it will be background for the thoughts that they really want to tell you. The action of the story is that Jack fell down and got a skull fracture or something. That's the action of it. All right. But if I walked up to you and just say, "Hey, look, Jack fell down," you'd be like, "Okay, who's Jack? Why do I care?"
Yeah.
Why do I care? And the why do you care part of it is the part of them going to fetch water, because the assumption is that if you are a human being, you're at least 70% water, therefore you know the value of water. So you empathize with someone who is going to get water, at least at the time when, that was written, not everybody had indoor plumbing. So everybody would somehow empathize with the idea, okay, we're going to get water. So so that's the world building that you need to empathize with the character, and the world building that makes you need that you use to understand what's going on. And then they hit you with the actual thing, which is, hey, skull fracture in a child. That's to me, that is what world building is. You see, that's
Yeah. Okay. Oh, I have so many things I could go off on from that. I actually want to come back to this sense of world building as the space where the writer and the reader connect. When I was young, I used to think of world building as a set of facts that the writer gave to the reader to let them know, and this is what you need to know. You need to know that there's a pail. And of course, if someone has never had to fetch water and has no concept that people still today
used to do that,
and still do it in many places, that they would be like, well, why are they doing that? And then do you have to explain that to them? But over the years, I've kind of changed my idea of what I think world building is. And I think of it now more as relationships. And I think that comes back to that idea of it being this contained space where writer and reader connect. It's world building because first of all, you're connecting the reader and the writer, and it's the only way you have to connect the reader and the writer.
Yes.
It's the only place that the reader can't read your mind, the writer's mind. It's the only. That's all we have to tell them what. And of course, the reader's bringing their own implicit and explicit, their explicit knowledge, implicit assumptions.
Can I just insert something there to the idea that the reader can't read the writer's mind? It's not just that, but the reader doesn't actually care about the writer's mind.
Yeah.
So it's the writer's responsibility to make the reader care.
Yeah, and also there's no reason that a reader would ever enter anything without caring unless the writer brings them with them.
Yes.
And so that's that external sense of world building. What function does world building serve? But then within world building, and this is where I become a serial maximalist, and it's not, and I'm not saying that that's the right way to do it, because it isn't the right way to do it. It is not the wrong way to do it. It's just a way.
It's a way. Yeah, it's a way.
It's a way that I'm obsessed with for whatever reason. I don't even know, right? But that once you get into the world building, and maybe this is the issue, that I don't focus so much on world building as that relationship between me and the reader. I start getting into the world building as partly the relationship between me and the setting, and me and the characters, and me and the world, but also within the world. So I immediately think, well, why are Jack and Jill, male or female, as Jill may or may not be, or another gender, I mean, we don't know, why are they together, right? That's where my mind goes. Why are they doing this together? Why not one of them alone? But so it's relationships between people and things, relationships between people and ideas, relationships between environment and people, between cultures. And then for me, that's where world building explodes, because I get so into this idea of how is everything interconnected.
Yes. And I think the connections, they're important. It's just that, and I think one of the things with me though is that I see things. I think I take writing from the perspective of a visual artist. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because I drew first before I was drawing before I started writing. But I see things as foreground and background. Right. And one of the things that I'm very conscious of in everything, but particularly in writing, is that I need to be careful what I foreground and what I don't foreground, because I don't want the signal to be lost in the noise.
Right.
Background has to be background, and if the background is too loud, then it becomes noise. I think that when we read something, we ascribe importance to the things we are reading with. Okay, someone has seen fit to point this out. What does it mean? So, stories, you can think of stories as a kind of promise. So when your setup is kind of like a promise, and it is when we don't deliver on the promises that we set up that a story or a book becomes unsatisfying. That's why people get dissatisfied by them. But the problem is, you may have put something in there as background information that is seen as a promise. Oh, look, there's a gun, and yet the gun doesn't fire. And so there's a subconscious sense of, hang on, there was a Chekhov's gun that didn't go off. What's going on here? So we have to be careful in that sense, not to set up several different Chekhov's guns without realizing that, oops, they're not going to fire. So why is it there?
Actually, my Crown of Stars series is the classic that I learned this on. Why use one detail when you could use 3 cool details, right? And then it was only after writing that I thought, wait a minute, these details are confusing. They're cool, and they create this very deeply textured world, but they confuse. There's so you pick. That's one of the things that I've learned. A few things. I've learned a few things, not many, I don't think. But one of the things is that you've got to pick the right detail.
And that's and that's where that cliche comes in, about killing your darlings. Now, you may write a first draft, and the first draft, I always believe the first draft is for the writer. I think the first draft is you indulging yourself and just writing whatever the hell you want. And at that point, when you feel okay, and I often humanize my manuscript. I feel like after the first draft, I feel like my manuscript then looks at me and says, okay, are you happy? Have you got that out of your system? Okay, now can we now shape it into something that someone would actually want to read? So at that point, once you're getting, once you start the second draft, you now have to take the perspective of, okay, a reader is going to read this thing. Someone who is not me, who doesn't have my background, who doesn't have who doesn't hold as important the things that I hold as important. They're about to read this thing. So how is it confusing? How are these things in jokes? As in, just when I say in jokes, I mean my jokes that not anybody else would understand. Why is this important to the narrative? What is this going to promise to the reader that may not be delivered? And should it go? And in fact, that's one of the things that I use when I'm revising. I'm like, what is the promise that this makes to the reader? Did I deliver on the promise? Should I therefore add the delivery of the promise, or should I just shave it off? Does it remove itself from what I think my themes are, my central themes are, and so on? What is the meaning of this? Why is it here? You remember we had conversations about battle scenes or conflict.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You know, should we talk a little bit about that? About battle
Yeah,
scenes?
actually battle scenes are a good way to talk about world building because
Yeah.
you have to be precise, and if you
Yes.
anything extra will confuse. Okay, yeah, go
Yes.
ahead.
So we had about 2 years ago, I think, was the first time we talked about a battle scene where I think you'd written a battle scene
Mm-hmm.
and you were just not satisfied with it.
I wasn't.
You knew you weren't happy, but you were too close to the material because I think you'd revised it again and again and again, and you couldn't you knew it was wrong. As a reader, you could tell yourself that, okay, look, this is not doing what I wanted to do, but you were too close to the material that you couldn't
Yeah.
see it.
Yeah.
And I think we talked about a few things. So one of the things about if you're going to have a battle in a place, you really have to establish, for example, the geography of the place very, very clearly in the mind of the reader. Where is this fight going to take place? You have to start from that. You have to really foreshadow that, but with a lot of clarity, so that in their heads they know where everything is. The reader knows where everything is to start with. That's before the fight. The worst kind of written battle scenes are the ones where the place has not been established, and then the writer starts to establish the place while the battle is going on. All right, which is not what you want to be doing during the battle. You want to have established the locale, fairly before the conflict begins. The second thing you want to establish is where the resources are. Right, again, before the battle. So who has the most soldiers, the most ordnance, who has the tactical advantage in terms of locale, who's got the higher ground, who has more ships, who has more motivated warriors. All right, what kind of training does everybody have? Who is afraid of whom? What's the psychological advantage that is already there? And and all of that has to be pre-established, and before the actual fight begins, so that when the fight actually begins, what you then do is you begin to show various flows of resource and advantage. That's really what a battle is. It's a flow. That's what combat is. It's a flow of advantage and resource. So resources get used up, resources get acquired, resources get lost, they get blown up. The element of luck comes in at some point or the other. Chance comes in. Things you can't control, like the weather, like a third party joining the fight that you knew nothing about, by the way. And just as a sidebar, if you're going to have a third party join a fight, it is always better if neither side knows about it, and if it's foreshadowed very indirectly, so that it makes sense for the third party to join, but it wasn't expected, and therefore they become a wild card. Wild cards only work if they're actually wild. So if you knew they were part of the negotiations, or they were brewing, or they're simmering already, then they're not really a wild card. But I always think that every battle, every conflict needs some kind of wild card in there. So I prefer when it's not been explained too much, when it's a surprise, but it follows from everything that's come before. But that they're joining in is a bit of a surprise. I think that at the end of the battle, there would have been a transfer of advantage from one to the other, right? But you'd already established, where the resources were, and you've seen through the battle how the resources have been depleted, how the advantages have shifted. And so by the time the battle ends, people know what devastation has occurred geographically, psychologically, and in terms of resource and advantage. So at the end of a battle, the reader should know where they are. Not just where they are in the book, but they should need to know where they are in terms of psychological, physical advantage, and geographically. They need to know everything that has happened in that sense. The worst kind of battle writing is where you get to the end of the battle and you're not quite sure. There's been a lot of action, but it's noise. It's nice and flashy, but you have no idea, what does this mean? What does this mean? What has happened here? Who's alive? Who's dead? And why?
This is one reason. Yeah, watch John Woo films.
Yeah.
Because he always creates his skirmish and battle scenes are always, where everybody is, where they're coming from, unless they come from out of the blue, which is the surprise. But it's you're never confused. It's never confusing. And actually, there's a springboard here to this idea of, what if you're writing in a completely secondary world, one that with no ties to Earth, and it's not that you're going to spend your first chapter dumping information. So this was the continent, and here was this country, and here was that country, and this, but that even with your first scene, you set, it's like you can start small and set larger. So here I am sitting at my desk, only it's a secondary world. So I'm a clerk and I'm sitting at a desk writing, and you pull familiar things to help ground, and you set the person where they are. They're in a room, or they're not in a room, they're outside, but you want a basic conceptual sense. And then you start small enough that the reader doesn't have to ingest a lot of information. And then you can expand from there. And that, I think, is the way to create a secondary world where you don't want readers to kind of infill a lot of expectation and assumptions into it.
Yeah, and that actually brings me back to something you said in the beginning, where your initial idea of world building was that you give information to the reader. I think the best and most elegant way of world building is to actually take information from the reader's mind. The idea is that you provide hints, and then the picture is completed in the head of the reader.
Yeah.
You just, the thing that you need to have control over is what is this word, what is this sentence going to, what is it going to stimulate, in the, is there enough commonality of meaning, so that the word is going to stimulate, the picture that you want. Because obviously, and I don't need to tell you this, words have different implications for different cultures. So you might say something, and it might mean something completely different, and that, that can often not be useful enough for the kind of world build I'm talking about. You need a common meaning, you need a common frame of reference to be able to do that in an elegant way. And if there isn't, then you have to give more information. But the worst thing, and science fiction writers and fantasy writers, I'm looking at all of us here, the worst thing we do is info dumping. It is the worst thing. Yeah. And the annoying thing is, like, we do it in the wrong time. People do it at the beginning of a book, and they start telling me, you start getting a kind of world building that is, an info dump that is it's like the books of Chronicles in the Bible, where this person begat this person begat this person. It's the worst kind. If you establish something at the beginning, if you establish an emotional bond with a character at the beginning of a book, all right, and some events that make the reader then invested in the book, and then you have a small part of the book where you say this person begat this person, they will forgive you for that. They're going to skip it, but they will forgive you for putting it in there. But if the first thing you encounter is, so back in the year of Gorgon, X begat this and begat that and all of that, and lo and behold, there was a lightning strike and there was an earthquake, the continent split in two, the good guys were here, the bad guys were here. Honestly, who wants to know that at the beginning? I don't, what I want to know is, okay, who am I rooting for in this book? What is this, who am I rooting for? I want to know that immediately when I start reading a book. I want to know, who am I bonding with here? They can be good or evil, I don't care, but who is the interesting character that I'm going to be following? And if I find someone to follow, then I'll follow them through even the begats and the kingdom comes and whatever. I'll follow them through all of that. But that, I want to first of all bond in the book. That's what I want to do.
Yeah, so the character in that sense, because we're human, and as humans, that's what we are. We exist because of our relationships with other people. We can't even grow up without relationships with other people. We can't survive. That the other thing that it reminds me, what you're telling about, is that I'm an info dumper, and it's something that I've worked on. I'm working on it, and it's fine if you're still working. By the way, people, this is like a lifelong journey. It's not we get it right after, X amount of time and then we're done. No, it's a never ending. That's what makes writing great, though, right?
Yeah, because we could have this conversation next year and say something completely different.
Yeah, and 10 years from now, and I mean, that's the whole point, is that we're still learning. But I think one thing that can be overlooked, not by you, obviously, but is that we can also build, as writers, we can build setting as emotion, so that but that's something that takes the same amount of time as it takes us to learn about another person, is to learn another language, because setting is a form of language.
Yes.
We have to understand what wearing a blue surcoat means in this
Yeah.
society. And we have to understand it not in a me telling you a blue surcoat is what, you know, the people who took her mother away when she was 5, right? I think
Yeah.
of, actually I think of the blue glove people, the blue hand people in Firefly.
Yeah.
They talk about it enough times, and the character River has reactions to the thought of it, so that when you finally see someone with blue hand, you
Then all of
go,
that comes back.
you
Yeah.
feel it. And that's
Yes.
what, for me as a world builder, that's what I want. I don't
Yeah.
want to have to say, you're going to feel, you should feel scared now. I want the reader to feel it
To
because
know
I
that. Yes.
felt it. Yeah.
Yes. You know, to weave in all those cues from the beginning, you know, so that the person,
Yeah.
all those, you know, I personally call it a point of collapse. Like, so like when we, you know, we've seen, so in Firefly, we had cryptic references to the blue hands, so that when we saw them, there was a kind of collapse of all the clues to that point.
Oh, I
You know,
love, that's a great
you know,
way. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
you know. So, but when we, you know, you were talking about John Woo, another film that does good world building, particularly about, you know, about battle scenes, is a film called Open Range. Um, it it is a western, you know,
Mm-hmm.
but they established where the fight, you know, you always know what's going on in Open Range. You always know where people are and who has what ammunition and whatever. But it's done in such an elegant way that, you know, it's just, it's, again, it's written so well. It's inevitable. What happens is inevitable, but it's, you can follow it as it's going on.
Yeah.
You know, and of course the other the other good scene was the one in the Untouchables on the, you know, in the
Yes, you
train station.
showed that to me. You
Yeah.
clipped that out for me, and that's a great.
Yeah.
Yeah, the train station steps, and the scene establishes where everyone is, and they
Yeah.
take their time.
Yeah,
That's the other
and
thing.
that is the beauty of it. That is the beauty of it. They don't hurry. All right. We go into the scene and we know the stakes. All right. So we go into the scene knowing the stakes, and then they slowly start showing us. They slowly start showing us. Here's the woman. Here's the baby. There's the clock. Here's the guy with, you know. Here are some sailors, and of course, you know, you think the sailors are random until the shooting starts, and of course, a trained military person will try to help. So the sailor tries to get involved. But a part that I hadn't even noticed when I first saw the film was from the early parts of the scene, there are people waxing the floor, and they're waxing the floor, and they're waxing the floor. And you don't realize that that's important until in the end, Andy Garcia's character slides along the floor, all
Yeah.
right, with his gun. All right. And you're like, why were they waxing the floor? Of course, he's sliding on it. So not, you know, it's a marble floor and it's waxed, so it's easier for him to slide on. So every single thing in that scene was setting it up. Every single thing, you know.
And that,
And
yeah,
no, go
I
on.
was just going to say, no, I was just going to say, and that means that it's possible in a perfect world for the world building to be layered in at the right times with
Yes.
your place, so that when you want that moment of action. And one of the things that I see in, and this reflects kind of when I started reading, but this idea that you got to go to action first, and that everything's got to be bam, 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 bam. It's like right in your face. Give a little, it's okay to give a little time. Because if you're, yeah,
It's a mistake. I think that mistake comes from a misinterpretation of in media res,
yes,
as in
yeah,
people think that means, you know, the conflict that is being referred to is not necessarily physical fisticuff type conflict. It is like the emotional conflict. It's like, what are the stakes here? What you need to get into fairly quickly is what's at stake here. All right. That doesn't mean you should go into action immediately. It just means that, okay, look, what is it that is at stake? Why do I need to follow this character? Why am I interested in this? What's going on? What are the things? You know, that's what that really refers to, rather than it means you have to open on a battle scene. I think
yeah,
that opening on a battle scene is a bit of a problem because well, we don't care about anybody yet. We don't know who anybody is. All right. Why should I care who's going to die or who's going to live? So it's kind of the same. It's the same problem when they say don't start with a dream sequence. It's the same thing. So a dream has individual meaning. But if you've not been introduced to the individual, then why would you care if they're dreaming about something? And especially if the things you dream about, obviously, are not going to continue because they're not real. Therefore, you wonder, okay, why have I just wasted a few pages in a dream world that doesn't exist and is not, is not really relevant? And that's one. I'm not saying nobody can do it. I'm saying it's harder to pull off. When you do these things. So it's that sort of thing. And obviously, another problem is that most readers these days are trained by television or films, and books are not films. Even though we have lots of transferable skills back and forth, but books are not films. Books are books.
Well, and then that sense of starting with an immediate action, usually violence, is it's where as readers it means we're forced to invest our own sense of shock and connection. So then you start using these shorthands, which is one reason you get women in refrigerators.
Yes.
And not because they work, but because they're shorthand, and that we are trained.
We should explain what women in refrigerators,
for those who may not know. Yeah, for those who may not know, it's was it Gail Simone who came up with the term?
I think,
or somebody.
So the term fridge, I think, well, it is certainly associated with Gail Simone now. I don't know if she came up with it, but it was because of the Green Lantern's girlfriend who was killed, chopped up, and placed in a refrigerator in one of the Green Lantern.
Right at the beginning.
Right at the beginning, yes.
Oh, look at my beautiful girlfriend. I love her so much. Bam. She's dead and now I'm angry. And that's the entire characterization. Yeah, but it means that person didn't function. And world building actually can have this trouble too, where you set up kind of typical tropes that you want the reader to say, oh, I know what that's supposed to mean. But to me, that creates a very stage set, kind of a shallow. Whereas I want to dig a little bit under. I would rather spend a little more time to understand what it really means and what the relationships are.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think people who come to reading, they want an immersive experience. They want, at least this is what I think, I think that's the kind of person, that's the kind of reader I am anyway.
That's that's what I am.
When I'm reading a book, what I want, and I try to write the kind of books that I want to read. So, but people who come to reading want an immersive experience. They don't want stage dressing. They want to believe they are visiting a world, that they are in a world. It's rich, it's layered, and it has, it has meaning. And things like fridging people, or its close cousin, to do it by rape, for example, so a woman gets raped and that motivates a male character to go off and do something, all right? Or also another cousin is, there's a pedophile, therefore we're going, this makes us entitled to go and kill this person or something. Or also, this person is a killable body, and by killable body, I mean hordes, zombies, aliens. We don't have to think about these people. We will just kill them without remorse. They don't they don't matter, so we're going to kill them. These are, to me, especially for a black man, these are very disturbing tropes. They're very disturbing to me, because you decide that a particular kind of body is, it's okay to kill a particular kind of body. It's okay, they're not human, so we're going to kill them. And what I try to do in my own books is to set that up as in, this is a killable body. No, not killable. See, basically, I tend to, like, in the Rosewater books and in Molly Southbourne, for example, I start off with, yes, we can kill these people because they don't matter. We can kill these people because they don't matter. And then when you're already into it, I then say, well, actually, they actually have their own internal lives and they're actually different. Actually, no, you can't kill these people, And I was talking to someone, I think it was 2 weeks ago or so, or someone, I made a comment, I think on Twitter it was, about me having a problem. Someone was interviewing me and said, when I said I don't like narratives that have hordes, like barbarian hordes who don't have their own agency, or aliens, or who don't have agency. or who are therefore not people, and therefore it's okay to mow them down. And the person, thinking they were being really smart, said, "Oh, but you have zombies in your book." I'm like, "Yeah, you didn't read it to the end, did you?"
Yeah. Yeah.
So like,
Yeah.
What doesn't occur to, I think what doesn't occur to a lot of people is that actually those kind of narratives come from internal biases that we haven't examined.
Yeah.
They come from narratives we haven't examined, and it's not really creative to have a zombie horde. It isn't, because okay, you filled the environment with a whole bunch of people that can be killed without remorse. All right, okay, it isn't new anymore. All right, it's not new, it's not innovative. You have to find newer. You have to have newer narratives. You have to find newer monsters, newer bad guys. Make it interesting for us. We don't want to see the same old thing anymore. We want new things.
Yeah, and the conceptual nature of world building also means that writers can get stuck in thinking that is edgy, and thinking that is, and without thinking about where those things come from. I completely agree with you about zombies, which is why there's very few zombie films or books that I like, because they are about disposability. The same way about the use of rape as a
trope.
As a trope, but it's
trope,
not edgy. It is not edgy anymore, and I'm not sure it was ever edgy.
No, it wasn't, because look, we've had rape since the beginning of literature. It's been
it's like it's been around, not new, and it's not. I wrote the Crossroads Trilogy. Is written with me talking about it's like, especially the middle book, Shadowgate, is really me commenting on and being really angry about this trope and saying, no, these women who, specifically women in this book, who are victims of war crimes, they're not just sad people that we can dispose. They have lives too. They live or die, or they live afterwards, and what happens to them then. I mean, I wrote a whole trilogy about this idea of who the hero is. And that's part of what world building can do when you're thinking about it. To me, is that you can be in your own dialogue with the history of the field.
Well, you have to be.
Yes, I think you do have to be.
Look, unless you want to write things that are forgettable and people are going to ignore, you have to be. Your world building has to be in dialogue with everything that's gone before, especially since, at least from my perspective, everything that's gone before has been kind of neglecting my personhood. So I have to write something. I have to write things that are in dialogue with the things that have gone before. So, at the same time, I can pay homage to something, at the same time criticize it, because, yes, I'm a fan of science fiction and fantasy. I like reading strange things, but I'm not going to ignore things like the racism of Lovecraft, or the symbolism of various staples of science fiction that actually need to be challenged, that need to be interrogated. So the whole point of your world building, like I said, has a lot to do with this thing you want to say about life and humanity. Before you even begin writing it, you need to know, what am I saying about the world? What is my point of view about the world? And how does that come out in what I'm doing? And that's, and everything. And the good thing about it is that when you're revising, anything that doesn't support that, you can just trim it off so that it tells that story better, and that and it flowers organically in the mind of the person reading.
And also you talked about the first draft being how we tell the story to ourselves. And a lot of times I find in the first draft, I go off here and there because I'm talking to myself about what I'm writing, and about what my concept is, and what I'm angry about, and what I'm excited about. And I can get that all down on the first draft. And then, of course, my job is to say, now, what is this story about?
And that is and that is also, because, again, we have blind spots, but that is the beauty of an editor.
Yeah.
And if anybody listening to this, honestly, if you have any disdain for editors, you're wasting your time as a writer. The editor is actually on the side of the reader. The editor approaches the text on the side of the reader. Let's put it that way. All right. So the editor is on your side, but trying to get the text to be readable for the reader, to be understandable for the reader. It's not trying to put the text in the image of the editor. It's trying to put the text it's trying to get the text to say what you're trying to say, but more effectively, basically. So a good editor will help you say what you want to say, and will help you clarify what you want to say, and tell you stuff that actually this doesn't help. And a good editor is worth their weight in gold.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, I have been saved from many a terrible mistake by a good editor.
They're excellent. But that's the thing. And I think, I suppose the term world building is a bit of a misnomer itself. I don't know how else to, because it probably, I think, like a new writer could hear the term world building and start to think, okay, so J.R.R. Tolkien, yes, let's start writing the history of this entire world. Let's start getting all the details down. Let me get the languages down. Let me do this. Let me find out what all of that stuff, even before writing. I did, I had a writing group once, and I had a guy there who, honestly, I knew him for 2 years, and he was still trying to build the world of this story that he had not started. He hadn't started it, but he was getting all the details. He was drawing the maps. He was writing the political history and all of that. And I mean, that's all good, but after a while, it becomes an excuse not to write.
And it may be that that's really all he wanted to do. I actually know someone who did years and years of extensive world building, and at the end of it, I think he basically realized that he didn't really want to write a story. He wanted to build the world. Yeah, it is good,
That is completely valid and good if that's what the person wants to do. But
then you've got to know.
It can be enjoying. It can be enjoyable. A person can enjoy that. It's good. It's a good thing. And I suppose the key thing is, if you're not, I've always seen writing as something that I enjoy doing, and I feel like it should be difficult, a little bit difficult, but not too difficult. Not so difficult that it's demoralizing, I suppose, but a little bit difficult. So it's difficult enough to stimulate you, but not so difficult that you are wanting to kill yourself every single day. It should be every other day that you want to kill yourself.
So maybe instead of world building, we're experience building.
I suppose so. Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah, we're creating. Yeah, but we're building a relationship between our story, as you said, the place where our story meets the reader, whatever the reader is bringing to it.
Exactly.
I'm going to go to questions.
All right.
Unless, wait, you'll get a chance to say something at the end. But is there anything else you want to say before I go to questions?
No. Let's go to questions. I'm ready for questions.
All right. Oh, there's so many good questions. I'm just going to start at the top. How do you know which reader you are writing? So I think that means which reader you are writing to. Me. Okay. I'm writing to me to start with. That's where I start.
Yeah, my first draft is to myself. And then subsequently, I think, okay, someone who I'm writing to, I think, about my 15 or 16-year-old self who was discovering novels for the first time. So I start to ask myself, okay, how do I translate this to that person who's just discovering science fiction, that person who's just discovering novels, who's discovering the joy of reading and so how do I translate that? Which parts of this have I made too easy for myself to understand, but not for a person approaching it cold? And so I think past me, present me is my first draft is for present me, and then subsequent drafts are for past me, I suppose. And then once an editor starts getting involved, then it's for the general public. Yeah.
One of my problems as a writer, and one I still struggle with all the time, is that I tend to write for the SFNF, the experienced SFNF reader, and that is inherently limiting. And it's one of the reasons I wrote a YA trilogy, a young adult trilogy, was to try to retrain myself to write to someone who didn't have 30 years of experience reading SFNF.
Exactly. Someone who doesn't, for example, know faster than light travel as a thing, because I think there's so much we take for granted. We don't realize we have trained ourselves as an audience, and we don't realize that actually someone coming in doesn't necessarily know what FTL means.
Yeah. And I'm still working on that. I'm going to be working on that my whole life. Okay, I'm going to skip Florrie's next question because I just answered the first one, but we'll come back if there's time. And I'm going to go to Robin's question. Years ago at a convention, Poul Anderson said that in world building, you have to include all five senses, including taste and smell. Do you agree, or is it too much?
I'm not, well, I'm not going to speak for the person who said that, but I think the person is describing description. Basically, when you're describing something, it is very good to include all senses. If you're doing any kind of description, that's not, I wouldn't say that is not world building per se, but if you have someone arriving in a place, yeah, you need to say what they see. They need to say if they have a breeze on them, if they're cold or they're warm. Can they smell coffee or spices on the air? Because the things they smell mean something. I mean, to this very day, I remember the very first time I ever traveled to Sorrento, Italy. I came into Sorrento on a train. I came out of the train station, and as soon as I walked, I think I walked about 2 yards or so. Immediately, I could smell leather. All right, it's and to this very day, I associate that smell of leather with Sorrento. It was sunny. I could smell the leather, and I followed it, and I could see the leather works. I could see bags and all kinds of things, and so that's a thing. And I'll even tell you a memory from my childhood. When I was growing up, so I don't know if they still do it these days, but in London in those days, to get to one other street, instead of going around the street, you could go through someone's front door and go out to their back door. I don't think they still do it, but that was, when I was a kid, we used to do that. All right. And they would just look at you like, hello, yeah, you're all right. There's one particular house we used to go through, and these were our Indian neighbors. And whenever you walked into that house, you would smell the most delicious food. All right. And then leave without it. So the Jungle Book was the very first movie I ever saw in the cinema, and I always associate it with that cooking because we walked through that house to get there.
But what a great world building detail! I'm serious. Yeah. That's something that tells you a lot of stuff that you don't even have to say that much about, right? Someone says, "Oh, let's just go through here," that that you could do it. Maybe anyway. I want to say two things about the five senses thing. One is that in a cultures may value different elements. So there may be a culture where in Persian culture has a whole, especially ancient Persian culture and maybe modern, which I haven't studied. But anyway, perfume gardens. These were, you had to know these things. You couldn't be a cultured person if you didn't know what the language of the different smells were, and you couldn't wear if you're going to see the king, you're going to wear one scent, and if you're going to go see a woman you're interested in, you're going to wear another scent, or a man you're interested in, or whether you're whatever. There's all these languages. So think about it, what it means culturally. It's great to realize that cultures have different ways of viewing all these senses, and then that goes down to that micro thing of a character, someone who grows up in the working leather, who comes into another city will say, "Oh, the leather workers are over here." And maybe maybe there's a guild, maybe they're on the run and they think maybe I can take refuge with them. And then that gives you all these
are these people I'm running from, should I avoid them?
Exactly. Maybe it's the leather guild that's going after you. And
I would say the important thing, one thing is to think about all the senses. It doesn't mean you have to include all the senses, but think about all the senses and think about the meaning of it. But in everything, you are looking for the telling detail. In every story, there is what is the telling detail, the detail that focuses the mind, and the one that is imbued with so much information that so for example, like I said, if I think of a curry dish, I get the Proustian memory of going to see Jungle Book. You want to imbue that detail with that information such that it brings up, there are lots of connotations to just one thing. So I would say think of all the senses. You don't have to put all the senses in there because it can be very weird if it doesn't mean anything. It has to mean something.
Yeah, you can have two characters walking through the same marketplace and they're going to notice different things because of who they are and what matters to them. And so it's not a checkbook where did I get all five? Yeah, it's more like exactly as you said. Consider why they matter.
Yeah, like if you're, I live on the coast. If if you can taste salt, if the surf is really, and I don't need to tell you this, I don't tell you this, Kate, but you can taste salt sometimes when you're close to the sea. You can taste the salt in the air.
When I come off the airplane, into the Honolulu airport, for those of you who don't know, I live in Hawaii, I know I'm home because the air. It's instant. It's like my whole body relaxes because I'm in the salt air, the smell of the air here.
Exactly.
Yeah. Frank wants to know, I'm sorry that I didn't see this earlier. What is meant by secondary world in world building?
Okay. You can. I mean, you mentioned it. You can take that question.
Darn it. Okay. I mean by secondary world, I mean a world that is not specifically connected to Earth. I believe all the worlds we create are connected to Earth because we can't help it because we are of Earth. But what it means is a fantasy world, say that, or a Star Wars is a secondary world in the sense that there's no, like, we never hear about Earth in the far past. It's just, it's in a galaxy far, far away. So there's no specific, we're not like dropping references to London, we're not dropping references to cows.
Or World War II or Hitler or JFK or something. Yeah.
Right. So there's no past references or present references. It's its own thing. And you see this mostly in fantasy, where it's a world with its own space that it was never connected. It's meant to be separate from Earth. That's what's meant by that. When planting wild cards for battles or plot significant events, how can you make those details fall into the background previously and not overly stand out to the reader?
Well, okay, so to my mind, I find that a great question. To my mind, you've got to put the information where it is not reacted upon by the characters. All right, it is significant enough to stand out, but the characters in the book don't react to it. So instead of basically, you have to put it in the background, but it's like the people who were mopping in the station in the scene we were describing, right? They have to be prominent enough that you remember they're there, but not prominent enough to be like, oh, okay. For example, it is normal to see cleaners in stations, so it doesn't have to mean anything. Then all of a sudden, someone does something that is related to that. You remember that, yes, there was that. So someone drops these things in, all right, but doesn't talk about them so much. All right. So someone is describing something and there's a throwaway detail, but doesn't say so much. Oh yeah, there was this brother of ours, but he was lost in the jungle ages ago. And then you go for a fight in the jungle, and then we know the two sides who are fighting in the jungle. Then all of a sudden, this guy just turns up. It's like in the end of Perdido Street Station. There's a character who just comes out and starts fighting, who's been mentioned all through the book, but has never been seen. And right now I've forgotten the name of the character. It's Jack something. But at the end of Perdido Street Station, this guy just turns up and he's fighting, and he's really skillfully fighting. But we know this because he was always a legend in the books. We didn't realize he was going to pop up at the end, but when he does pop up, it kind of makes sense that he's some kind of anarchist. All right. We know about it, but we just not, it's the detail is there. We just don't, we don't think about it so much. So that is the skill of it, is what I will say. That is the skill of the writing, and you have to do it by trial and error. You show it to your beta reader, say, well, look, I did this. Does this person seem, this person seems so shocking, or does it seem inevitable? So the idea is that you make it one, surprising, but inevitable at the same time. As in, yes, that's what this is. So there has to be some kind of recognition on the part of the reader that, right, that's why this is happening. That's where this person or this, this battle cruiser has come from or something. All right. But you don't necessarily have to explain it in that way. And, it's skill. You're going to do it by trial and error. And I'm not an expert in this. I only work here.
I only work here. One of the reasons, actually, to get back to that battle scene that you read for me and that I had been going over and over, one of the things I did was I drew, the action sequence starts in one place and then it travels 20 kilometers to another place where the actual battle takes place. But you have seen that second place, the industrial park, you've seen it before from a train. So it's a way, and someone had a reaction to it that was not related to anything battle oriented, but they say, I've seen that sky tower. So it's a really obvious physical thing, right? I've seen that before, says someone, and then they start talking about, why could you have seen that before? What does that mean? It's not related to the battle, but now that piece of that functional physical object, which I'm going to be able to talk about, everyone can orient themselves to where they are to that. That's been set up now. The reader has heard about it. The other thing I did was that I drew very specific maps for myself so that in my head, there was no confusion about where I was, because I find that I get confused if I only have a vague map for something that needs a specific placement. And you can get away with that. I can get away with vagueness if they're traveling 500 miles cross country. I don't have to know every single thing they see along the way. Although if you have ordnance maps from 18th century, the 18th century, like I did for the Spirit Walker books, I used those when I had cross country things. But so if you know it in your own mind, it's easier to hook the battle sequence on easily remembered physical or directional things.
Yeah, I do. What I do, I actually do storyboards because again, I come from a comic background. When I say I come from a comic, as a consumer of comics, not like I worked in comics, as a consumer of comics. I think in storyboards. So when I need to do a battle scene or a fight scene, I draw it out. And then I simply describe what I have drawn out. And if it, because if it doesn't make sense in what you've drawn out, then it's not going to make sense in text either. And the reason people get confused by what you've written is because there's no visual idea of this thing that is going on, so, and it's not to say you can't do cool things for the sake of doing cool things, but if you want to do a cool thing in a fight scene or a battle scene, do it and then track it back. Like, okay, how will this, because it will be so much cooler if people have anticipated it without knowing they're anticipating it. It is so much cooler if it's all been foreshadowed and all of a sudden this cool thing happens. So if, for your own sake, you might start from writing the cool thing, but then you need to time travel and go back and say, okay, fine, I need to put in all the clues, all the jigsaw pieces for this cool thing to happen. And why else, if it's not cool, why else would you be doing it?
Exactly. I also think of it, a fight scene is not just a John Woo fight scene, but it's also a dance sequence.
Yeah.
So, when I see dance sequences on screen where they're all choppy, they're kicking their arm, but they don't mean anything to me.
Yeah,
you need to know. Yeah. So think of it in that way, maybe. Okay. I'm going to move on to Hazel's question. What was the most difficult world for you to create, and how did you overcome the difficulties? This is easy for me. Whatever I'm working on right now is always the most difficult, because I always try to do something that I haven't done before. So that means I'm always kind of working into something new for me.
So without, what I'm working on right now actually has about 16 worlds. So it is really difficult. It has about 16, 17 if you include something that I thought of this evening, but it includes at least 16 worlds right now.
I'm so excited already.
So that's difficult for me right now. But let's just put it this way: Rosewater was a bit difficult because it had a lot of history that doesn't show up in the book, and there's a lot of stuff that informs what did show up in the different books, and I had to write a lot of it because I had to write a history of that world from 2012 all the way to 2069.
Wow.
And now, we don't even see 2069 in any of the books, but I wrote the history of the world up until then. I wrote everything that happens and all of that, all the way to that. And I don't know, there might be a fourth Rosewater book, who knows? But the point is, a lot of that stuff, I needed to keep it in my head when I was writing the novels. The other thing is that it also affects the editing, because if an editor thinks, okay, well, why is this here? Can't we change this? It has ramifications in the entire timeline. Yeah. So something that they think, oh, we don't need this, we don't need this. And sometimes I had to fight for things. Say, well, look, I know it doesn't look like it, but this thing is important. And I'm just, just we're just going to leave this in. Just indulge me and leave it in there. And yeah, people wonder about certain things. I kept all of it mostly in my head is the strange thing, because most people say, oh, how did you keep track of things and all of that? And I said, I kept it in my head because I had been thinking about it for a very long time, and I could see it. And I can't, again, I think like an artist. I think visually. I can't write a story that I can't see. So if it's just a bunch of ideas, it doesn't work for me. I get ideas, and then I get links to those ideas, but it's still not a story yet until I can picture a character, and then the character interacting with those ideas, and then it becomes alive. So I think I've rambled on this question a little bit, but let's just say Rosewater was the most difficult. But the one I'm writing now is even more difficult than that because, again, 16 worlds. Very, very
16 books? A 16 book series?
Worlds.
16 books?
16 worlds.
Are you going to go over 150,000 words?
I'm gonna try. I tried to keep my books under.
I'm waiting. I'm going to laugh. I'm going to do nothing but laugh when it happens.
I'm going to try to keep it under 100,000. I will try.
Yeah, I say that every time.
Yes, I still remember short stories that turned into novellas, that turned into novels, that turned into 3-part trilogies.
Yeah, I do remember every single, every page passing as I cried. Okay. Oh, I want to say one thing to that. If you can keep it all in your head, that's fine. If you need to write it down, get a notebook and
please.
Down and because if you can't keep it all in your head, to follow up what you said, it is so good to have a place you could refer to it easily, because that saves a lot of time later.
Yeah, do what works for you.
Yeah.
There's no right or wrong way of doing this. So you have to find your own way. You have to find your own technique of doing these things. As long as it works, it works.
All right. Oh, here's an interesting question from Leanne. How much?
Before you do that, and I apologize for interrupting, we are at the hour. So if you want to do the wrap up and then continue questions after that.
Let's go a little longer before I do the wrap up. Is that okay?
No,
or can perfect. You only do, you're not limited on the SFWA YouTube channel?
No, not that I'm aware of. I was just making it aware that you were both aware of that.
I know, and I appreciate it.
And
because,
also,
I'm sorry.
The writing thing that SFWA is also holding on Sundays starts at this hour. So we've seen a couple participants leaving for that reason.
Okay.
I think.
We'll try to get down through. There's only like 4 questions left. So we'll go through those. And exactly. And I was going to say, now you're one of us. We've gone over time.
Do you want me to hang around? I can.
Okay, this is an interesting question from Leanne. How much do you feel world building has been impacted by our 2020 lockdown lives? Do you feel readers' attention and attention spans have shifted, and that the way world building is conveyed therefore has to be differently focused now?
Okay, so first of all, know your attention span, and by you, I mean everybody's attention span has been pretty much nuked by smartphones, regardless of lockdown. It's been nuked. Smartphones, internet surfing, the way we live our lives, our attention spans, streaming TV, instant gratification. We're doomed if we don't find a way to control that. I mean, we were doomed before lockdown. So no adjustments need to be, in my opinion anyway, and I could be wrong, but no adjustments need to be made for that. But either way, I still believe in writing the book you want to read. So you don't need to second guess the audience in that way. You need to write the book you want to read, and then let the audience decide if they want it or not. That's up to them. That part is not under your control. So I really don't pay too much attention to attention spans in that way, because I don't think it. I already assume that attention spans have been nuked, and that's why I try to have, for example, very short chapters in my books. I've made my chapters very short. I don't linger on too many things. I basically allow the plots to move along, because the speed or not speed of what's going on, again, attention spans can be affected by that. So that's what I do. I try to keep a lot of white space on the page, because again, if you have a block of text, it tends to exhaust the reader. And if they basically, look, you have to realize that you are competing with smartphones, you're competing with television, you're competing with PlayStations. All right. why would someone want to pick up my book if they can play through it on a PlayStation? So I have to make my book more compelling than a game on a PlayStation, all right? Or than the next notification on a smartphone. So we are trading in attention. We are trading in people's attention, all right? So our job is to grasp them and hold on to the attention as much as possible for as long as possible and give them reason to want to keep coming back to read it, basically.
Everything that you said, and I just want to add that there's no benefit to trying to figure out what readers want in the largest sense.
Yeah.
There's a benefit into saying, are they going to connect with this? Am I giving them the information they need right now in the specific sense? But in the larger sense, there's just no point. We don't know. We don't know how things are going to fall out, and we can't chase the audience.
And we don't need to know, because even if a thing you're writing, it might not be in vogue right now. Something might happen in the world to make that thing, in vogue a number of years later. Certain things can happen. So don't worry about the audience. Write what you want to write, and then your time will come.
That's the whole point of art. The whole point of art is that I write the book I want to write, and you write the book you want to write, and they're different books, not the same books. That's why we're doing this. Okay, is it possible to pants world building? Yes. Absolutely.
Spoken from the mouth of a pantser. Absolutely.
I am and I'm not. I mean, there are some things I need to know, like conceptually, I need to have the very vaguest sense of like, I'm in a house, right? I feel a sense of the house, but I learn a lot as I go. And some of my best ideas come while I'm writing. I'll go like, and then they turned the corner and, oh, they could see that. And that would, right? And then that's how I work.
Yeah, and remember your first, even see, everybody actually plots. It's just that they plot later. So we plot later. My first draft is generally a pants thing. I just kind of go through it, and I enjoy writing it, but it's mostly because I'm making it up as I go along. Then I have to make it make sense. So the first draft, yay, second draft, aha, now it has to make sense. Yeah. So how are you going to make it make sense? And honestly, one of the things in your development as a writer, one of the things you realize is that the real writing is done when you're rewriting. That's when the craft comes into it. Everything else you do is really just indulging yourself. But when you have to apply craft is from the second draft onwards. And that's where the hard work comes into it, and the frustrations, and and the booze.
But it's glorious. I love revising. I love revising, because that's when I can finally say, I have this fuzzy sense of this, and I have this down, but now I have a sense of what needs to be here. Sometimes in discussions about science fiction, there is a division between hard and soft science fiction. Do you have any advice? My first gut reaction is there's no division. That's an old meme. That's an old trope.
I'm sorry, it's bullshit. It's bullshit. It's bullshit. And for some reason, it makes some people feel good about themselves to say, yes, this is hard science fiction, and blow a trumpet or something like that. But honestly, it's bullshit. I'm lucky because my own particular intersection with science is a kind of, medicine is a kind of science art mixture anyway. So I've got social anthropology and stuff like that. But honestly, this stuff it means things to a certain subset of people, but I'm not one of them. It doesn't mean anything to me. So
They wondered, do you have any advice for new writers who don't emphasize the technical? Don't worry about it.
Yeah,
write the book. Write
the book you want to write. Don't worry about where it falls. Don't worry about its genre. Don't worry about what it just write it, and let everybody else decide what it falls under. That's their business. You don't even have to agree with what it falls under. So don't worry about that.
Yeah. Okay, and then the last question we're going to take, and then we are really running. We'll run to about 70 minutes. Tom Henthorne, writing about William Gibson, comments, quote, Gibson represents reality as it is experienced by his characters rather than in purportedly objective terms, unquote. Is this observation an insight about effective world building?
No, it isn't. It's an insight into the person who into the worldview of the person who made the comment. I mean, you have to make a decision about how you're rendering your world, but I honestly believe that reality is an illusion. It's a hologram. And none of us, we don't all see reality in the same way. So the way you decide to render your reality will reflect your own particular views on what reality is.
The idea that there's an objective reality is
false. It's not true. There is no objective reality. It's not true. Most of the things that you see are actually empty space. Molecular forces might make them think, they make you think they're solid, but most of reality is empty space. And when you perceive things, you're not actually perceiving. You think you're perceiving things right now, but you're not. You perceive things milliseconds ago. Your brain, you perceive many different versions of reality, and your brain chooses one, and then your consciousness actually time travels back milliseconds ago. So you're not actually the reality you think you're experiencing now, you're not actually experiencing right now either. And I don't want to go into it now, into the neuroscience of it, because that would just hijack the entire conversation. But this stuff fascinates me. The human mind fascinates how we decide on consensus reality. It fascinates me to no end. But there is no reality, so do your own thing.
Well, we have gone over time because we're just that great. So let me do a little housekeeping. From here on out, all else being equal, the session will run live for 1 hour on the third Sunday of each month from now until the next Nebula conference, which will be in May. In about a week, a recording will be uploaded to SFWA's YouTube channel for anyone to view. What's coming up? N.K. Jemisin on power in world building and world building as power. Zen Cho on prose style as world building. Elliott Tade on how details build worlds. Rebecca Roanhorse on archaeoastronomy and the cosmos of a world. Ken Liu on world building through technology. It's not about the machines. And Nyla Magruder, who is both a writer and a visual artist and illustrator, on the visible and tangible as detail in background setting. And that will take the series. I love Nyla. That takes the series up to the next Nebula conference. So thank you, Tade. Thank you.
Thank you for having me here.
I'm delighted. Do you have any final thoughts? Anything you want to add?
No, I think we said everything. I'm really glad to have been able to sit here and bloviate.
Exactly. That was the whole point of me wanting to do this. Is like, and I want to thank SFWA specifically for making this platform happen. I reached out to them and they said they could do this here. And I want to thank everyone who showed up for the live video cast, the first one, and to anyone who has watched this all on the future SFWA YouTube channel. Thank you also. The next sessions are November 15th and December 20th. And should feature N.K. Jemisin and Zen Cho. I'm not sure in which order. I hope to see you then. Thank you all so much.